Welcome. We have Ball of Confusion week 4, and we have 4 students with questions that are all very similar. So Susie's going to start off with a question from Effie, and both of us are going to kind of talk our way through the other 3 questions, and they're all kind of similar around the same topic. So Susie's going to start with Effie, and I'll jump in as interested or needed. So Susie, why don't you go ahead and get started.
Great, will do. Like Steve said, this is from Effie, and the question is, what makes a product high involvement, and what product poses risk factor to low and high information consumers? These are all interrelated elements. Involvement, risk factor, type of product, all go hand in hand in the decision-making process. There are 3 categories in that process. The first one is routine response behavior. This falls under the low involvement category. The product is usually something that is not very expensive. It's purchased frequently, but it doesn't take too much thought into, okay, do I want this product or do I not? The next thing is the risk factor, and this falls under the low risk factor. You don't need any research to select the product because you buy it frequently, so you really don't need that. Some of the products that fall under this category would be toothpaste, shampoo, socks, things of those nature. So that's the first category. Second category is limited decision making. This is a medium involved scenario. Medium costs, you purchase on occasion, not frequently, on occasion. There's medium risk to this because the monies involved are not a large chunk to have to worry about too much. Products that fall under this category would be a low-end cell phone, AirPods, things of those natures, small kitchen appliances, things like that. So that's the second one. The third one is extensive decision making. This is high involvement. This is expensive items that you don't purchase very often, and they need a lot of research. Risk factor in this is extremely high because you've got a lot of money invested. You may even have had to take out a loan to purchase this item. So we're talking things like car, house, boat, things of those natures, that fall under that category. Steve,
hey,
any additions?
That's great. Yeah, that sizes it up perfectly, I think. If you stop and think about the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month purchases, on the lower end, the first category of the 3 that Susie talked about would also be called consumables, paper products, things you need toothpaste, you're really not thinking too much, it doesn't take a lot of time, and the risk of making mistakes very low. On the other end would be those decisions that are really typically for the individual high cost or high risk, meaning if you made a bad decision, it would be costly. It could be costly in financially, it could be costly in time, it could be costly in emotionally. Those are the kinds of things where you have to stop and think and kind of work your way through them. Many times you need an advisor. Retirement funds, a real estate broker or agent is the one that serves the purpose when you're buying a home, typically. Or buying a car. I mean, today cars, you can buy a truck for $75,000, $85,000, which is absurd to me. That's almost as much as a lower end entry level home. But Susan's right. Those are kind of the 3 ways to think about it. So let's go to Hannah and let's see how Hannah's question reads. Hi, as I was reading the differences between a low and high involvement decision, I wondered if at times a low involvement decision would be more stressful than a high involvement decision, especially with so many competitors in the market. What do you think? I'm thinking that there could be an example. Here's kind of a strange way to think about this. I'm active on social media. I've got a large group of friends that I relate to. Most of us are pretty active in what's going on currently, socially, and fashion is one of those places where, a t-shirt, an ironic t-shirt, or a belt, or a pair of sneakers or shoes doesn't seem to hit the threshold of a high involvement in a financial way. And it seems to be more like, a pair of shoes, people buy shoes all the time, generally, that you could stop and kind of ponder, if I bought this particular brand or type, what would my friends think? If I bought this other one, I know somebody that typically gets frozen with second guessing themselves over really simple decisions and choices, even things like taking the bus or getting on a plane, what time, overthinking it. So I think that maybe Hannah's question might, and the way I'm looking at it, might relate more to the person's personality and the way they think about choices they make, as opposed to the external risks that Susie talked about, which were in those three categories: low, medium, and high, from generally a financial standpoint. So that would be my thought about Hannah's question. You have any thoughts, Susie?
There's one last aspect that I think that we might need to touch base on, and that is, Hannah was asking about the stress of purchase. We also have to think about the psychological stress too, I think, and that's just touching on, oh my gosh, what did I make the wrong decision, and it might cause anxiety. So those I think is another way to kind of look at it backdoor. So to me, that would cause a little bit more stress for sure.
Yeah. That's a good point. Brody, his question reads, as I read the chapter, it mentioned high and low involvement. Do we see this every day in a marketing environment or every so often? So in a marketing environment, I'm not sure the context Brody's asking in terms of if it's the company view into the marketplace and how the company positions their product as a low or high involvement, or if it's the market looking at a particular offering and deciding whether it's low or high or medium involvement. What do you think, Susie?
Well, I kind of looked at it in a little bit of a different direction. I sort of took it to mean that these kinds of, I think he was saying about the high and low involvement, that the product that falls under those categories would dictate whether it's low, medium, or high, would kind of dictate the marketing strategy of the company. And then also it kind of helps you decide, how to market that product and where the target market actually lies. So I'm thinking that that's just an additional way to look at it.
How would you, based on what you just said, how would you use buying a new car as an example, with what you're looking at Brody's question? How would you?
Well, since a car's high market, it's high risk. So I would think that particularly when you are trying to sell a product like that, that you put a lot of time into the product, you approach it differently because your customer is different. So I'm thinking that your strategies are going to be much different than they would for a tube of toothpaste. So that's kind of how I looked at it. One thing that I found very interesting too, Stephen, and I don't know if this is the right time to insert it or not, but before I forget it, I think I'd like to get it across. And that is that when you think about these three categories, again, we're talking, low, medium, and high, you also have to think about the service level. That's also part of that whole situation. So when you have a low risk or type of product, your service is not going to be there. When you're talking about a high-end product, it is. Like you said, you talk about a realtor. Well, they're going to take you around and show you homes. So you're going to get much more service if it's that type of a product than you will if it's a low-end product. So they all, like I said in the very beginning, they all interrelate. They all go hand in hand. They work together.
Yeah, it's interesting. Another way of saying what you said is that in a retail environment, at a local grocery store, you're buying a consumable like a paper product or toothpaste. You're conducting a transaction with the person at the door at the cash register. You're not expecting a lot of advice or guidance or direction or value out of that, except to get the purchase price right, get my credit card right, and get me out the door. When you're buying real estate, you're expecting a lot of hand-holding and making the process slow down, so I know. And the realtor is actually, if they're smart, trying to create value for you in terms of providing confidence in the process, and trusting in the knowledge and experience that the realtor brings to that table. And I think when a realtor isn't spending time creating value for the buyer is reluctant to conduct business because they don't have that trust and confidence they're expecting out of a high risk proposition. You could, this is an absurd example, but if I needed to have surgery, I could knock on my neighbor's door and see if he knows his way around an appendix operation. I could save a lot of money, maybe that makes it lower risk, but when I pay for a surgical procedure and I pay a lot of money, I expect a lot of attention, a lot of, almost perfection out of that process. So yeah, it's an interesting question about low risk, medium risk, high risk, and how the market prepares for and approaches that. I would say this about the car, for example, that if the car, I think correctly, falls into that high risk category, I think the companies that market and sell Ford, Chevy, Chrysler recognize that it's a high risk choice. And I think they make an attempt to make it seem like a low risk choice. And they'll do it this way. You'll go in, look at the sticker price on a $45,000 sports car, and but then the buyer or the salesman will say, well, it's only $210 a month. So they're kind of translating, or let's just use the word translating, what would be a high risk proposition and then attempting to recast it or reframe it as a low risk. Mm-hmm. And using financing. And I think homes, you have adjustable rate mortgages, you've got other programs with low down payments, you've got a VA program. I think there's a recognition in that higher end that the market needs to feel like it's not such a risky proposition. So there may be I don't know if that's marketing or communication or what that is, but I think that exists to help foster the sales process and get product off the lot and into people's hands.
It's an excellent technique. It really is. Yeah, to switch the thought. It's the thought pattern of the buyer. So exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So Julian is our last person with the question. So Julian's question, I see that low involvement is relatively more attracted to be sought out more than high involvement products. Could you explain why that is? Also, how can one train consumers to think like high involvement people? Retailers, companies have a mechanism of shifting people's minds from low to high. I would like to know how to change someone's perspective by an ad, if possible, by an ad. I think by an advertisement.
By an ad. Mm-hmm.
So it's. I think what he's saying is, how do you convince someone to think that they can afford a high involvement product? What kind of mechanism can you use to shift people's mind from a low to a high? That's what I'm hearing a little bit. I'd like to know how to change someone's perspective. Mm-hmm. He uses advertising as an example of changing perspective. So, I mean, What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that what you said about the salespeople, just in your last little blip, I think that changing the mind of the buyer by the seller is what he's asking. And I think that, again, like you said, it's difficult to do that in a low end scenario because there's not a whole lot to consider, because the price is usually less and the time involved is much less. So I'm thinking that how can you change those ads? And I think it's in the marketing, we're back to marketing again, is how do you appeal to those people and make them feel as though their investment is not that great. And even though it is, make them feel good about doing it.
Yeah, and you know, another way to look at this would be what's the relationship the customer has with the company? Meaning, if it's a low risk proposition, I'm buying paper towels, I don't necessarily look for a particular brand of paper towels. I may just, because paper towels are paper towels to me, I might just look for the lowest price. I may have caught an ad on television that said Brawny is a better paper towel, and I may learn that I have to pay much more money for that, and it may not be enough for me to translate that into a higher involvement decision. And on the other end of the scale, with high cost products, homes, cars, instead of it being a transaction like going through the checkout line at a grocery store buying paper towels or toothpaste, you don't expect to have a relationship with the cashier. You don't have a conversation about where they've been, where they work, how's their family, where's their dog. You don't develop a first name basis for the cashier. But with a home or a car, you're dependent on that person, in this case, the representative of the company. And because of that, you, by necessity, have to have a relationship, which implies that the person you're talking to is competent, knows how to do the job, and it's somebody you can trust. That's one of the challenges car dealers have, is that they can be competent about their product, their cars, but there's this lingering doubt about whether the person who's talking to me from the dealership is interested in my best interests or their best interests. And that creates a little bit more of that emotional toll or tension that you mentioned earlier, Susie. You know, I think to get to Julian's question, I would say this. On a high end, if you're trying to get someone to think high end, you have to do that through the relationship with the person they're talking to, the real estate agent, the salesman, the financial advisor who's advising you on your retirement. The only way I can, if I'm counseling Susie on a retirement plan, Susie's not going to buy stocks like you would at a grocery store. She wants someone to sit down and put a plan together, explain the plan, how the process works, how much it costs, what's the expectations and the outcome. And so what I'm going to do as a financial advisor is assure Susie I'm a fiduciary, meaning I think in her best interests, and I operate and communicate with her on the premise that her retirement is my biggest priority. And so that's how I operate. And I can influence Susie's thinking about buying higher end or high risk products because I have this relationship where I'm developing some trust, and because I'm giving her advice, Susie's more inclined to take my advice. If I'm a low end, if I'm selling toothpaste, you can't put a salesman in the aisle to sell toothpaste one box at a time and expect that to be cost effective. I mean, it costs too much money to have somebody selling a tube of toothpaste than it does selling a car or a home. So this idea, I think part of the answer to Julian's question is that if you've got someone who has a trusting relationship, and you can have a little bit of that in retail. I mean, you go in and buy a clothes or a pair of shoes, sometimes you develop a little bit of a relationship to base that on. But I think it's going to be driven not by an ad in the paper or TV, it's going to be driven by relationship. Now, I would add one more thing to this, is that you can impose a kind of relationship by using testimony. So you have a pharmaceutical ad on television where you've got a couple, three people talking about how they had pain and now they don't have pain. That's closer to that relationship, trusting relationship. It's not the ultimate, but it's a way to get there. So if you're going to do an ad to influence someone's thinking, the quick answer to your question would be to use testimony, people that you can relate to, your customer relate to, that they can trust, that they don't have skin in the game. They don't have anything to benefit by telling them something that's not true. So that's how, I think anything more, Susie, to add on that? Or?
I don't think so, Steve. I think we've covered pretty much the basis on that. Yeah.
All right. Well, good job again. I'd say continue to do the reading as we've always suggested you do that. Take the quizzes, get involved in a discussion forum, and also if you have a question, any kind of question on the course, the topic of the week, drop it into the ball of confusion, and Susie and I will pick it up with a video right after the end of the week. So I guess with that, we will call it the end of week 4.
Okay.